The night hung heavy over the Hartley Ranch, the kind of silence that only deep country nights knew how to carry. The land stretched wide, every fence post and corral bathed in silver by the restless moon. Inside the house, the air was still, save for the groaning of old timbers and the occasional whip of wind slipping through the cracks. Samuel Hartley lay beneath a thick quilt in his broad bed, his breathing even, his eyes shut. To anyone who stepped into the room, he looked asleep. But Samuel was very much awake, his mind sharp, his heart waiting. It wasn't in his nature to play games, not usually. He was a man who built his fortune with sweat and straight talk, the kind of rancher others respected because he didn't put on airs. Yet tonight he was pretending, feigning slumber like a boy caught in mischief. He had a reason, though. The woman he had taken into his home, Clara Benson, had carried herself with such quiet dignity since arriving that Samuel found himself restless with questions. A poor widow with 2 boys to feed, she had been left with nothing after her husband's sudden death in the mines. Samuel had seen her pride when she took the job as cook and housekeeper, had heard the quiver in her voice when she insisted she wanted no charity. She had agreed to work, not beg, and that spirit stirred something in him. Still, doubt scratched at the back of his mind. Too many people in his life had worn masks. He needed to know if Clara's character was real or simply another kind of act. The door creaked, slow and hesitant, like a whisper of wood. Samuel forced his muscles to stay loose, his chest to rise and fall with the rhythm of false sleep. The faint glow of a candle slipped into the room, the flame dancing against the walls. He caught the soft scuff of her boots on the floor and then her smell, a mix of soap, bread dough, and a faint trace of lavender that clung to her despite the worn dress she wore. Clara Benson stepped carefully into the room, her face half in shadow, her expression soft in the candlelight. She held a folded blanket draped over one arm, her other hand steadying the flame. For a moment, she simply stood there at the side of the bed, looking down at him. Samuel felt the weight of her gaze, and though every instinct urged him to open his eyes, to meet that look, he forced himself to stay still. Her lips parted, and a whisper slipped out, fragile but clear enough to cut through the silence. "You give, even when you don't have to. God bless you for it." Samuel's heart gave a sharp tug at the sound. There was no greed in her tone, no trace of calculation. Just gratitude, raw and unpolished. She set the blanket gently at the foot of his bed, smoothing it down as though it mattered, though he already had enough quilts to keep out the night chill. Then, without hesitation, she bent to the floor. Samuel nearly opened his eyes when he felt her hand brush the boots he had left scattered beside the bed. Instead of ignoring them, instead of cursing the mess, she took a rag from her apron and began to polish. Her movements were patient, slow, each stroke of the cloth bringing out a shine in the scuffed leather. The candlelight caught on the boots until they gleamed faintly. When she finished, she set them neatly in their place, a quiet act of care no one had asked her to give. She straightened, her shoulders rising with a weary breath. Then, to the empty air, she spoke again, her voice breaking slightly. "I'll never repay the kindness you've shown, Mr. Hartley, but I'll serve honest, and I'll raise my boys right. I won't let you down." Samuel's throat tightened. He heard the echo of pain in her words, the kind that came from shouldering too much alone. He felt the truth of her vow settle deep in his chest. Clara blinked hard as if fighting off tears, but she didn't allow herself to crumble. Instead, she tucked the rag back into her apron, straightened the braid that had come loose during the day, and turned toward the door. The floor groaned under her weight as she slipped out, careful to close the door without a sound. The candlelight vanished with her, leaving the room in darkness once again. Samuel lay motionless, his eyes burning behind their lids, his chest tight with feelings he hadn't expected. He had gone to sleep pretending, waiting to catch her in some sign of greed or weakness. But what he had seen instead was a woman who carried honor even when no one was watching. As the silence pressed back in and the moonlight crept across the room, Samuel knew something in him had shifted. Clara Benson was not a burden, not a schemer, not another hand reaching for his fortune. She was a woman of strength, of humility, and of quiet courage. And in that moment, Samuel realized that what he had witnessed tonight would change the way he looked at her for as long as she stayed under his roof. The first light of dawn spilled across the plains, casting the Hartley Ranch in a golden wash. The roosters had already crowed, and the horses snorted restlessly in the barn. Inside the house, the smell of frying bacon drifted through the halls. Samuel Hartley sat at the long oak table, his head resting beside him, his broad hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. His eyes, sharp and steady, carried a heaviness from the night before. Sleep had only touched him in fragments, broken by the memory of Clara Benson's whispered vow and the quiet polish of his boots. From the kitchen, the clatter of pans and the low hum of a woman's voice reached him. Clara moved with practiced purpose, her sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back in that familiar braid. The morning light streaming through the window caught her face, softening the tired lines carved there by hardship. She was not a woman who wasted time on self-pity. Even with little, she made much. He admired that more than he cared to admit. When she stepped into the room, carrying a plate, Samuel let his gaze follow her. She placed it before him, eggs, bacon, and fresh bread, then quickly busied herself at the counter again as if the simple act of serving him was something she shouldn't dwell on. "You didn't sleep much," she said finally, her back still turned, her voice careful. "Your eyes are telling on you." Samuel lifted his fork, masking the smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Sleep comes easy enough when a man's got good folks under his roof." Clara stilled, her hand tightening on the cloth she used to wipe the counter. A faint color rose in her cheeks, but she didn't look his way. "We're grateful, Mr. Hartley, more than I can put into words." He watched her carefully. He had seen her unguarded the night before, but now the walls were back up. She carried herself with humility, but also with pride, as if afraid gratitude might look like weakness. He decided to press her a little, to see if her honesty held under the weight of harder words. "Clara," he said slowly, setting his fork down. "You know folks in town talk. They say widows sometimes find ways to secure themselves a better life. Ever think of that?" The rag in her hand stilled. For a long, tense moment, she didn't move. Samuel could see the way her shoulders rose as she drew in a sharp breath, the way her head dipped before she finally turned to face him. Her eyes locked onto his, steady and unwavering, though her voice trembled faintly. "I know what people say," she answered. "But I won't trade my dignity for comfort. My boys deserve a mother they can be proud of, not one who begged or schemed her way into another man's house. I'll work these hands raw before I let them think I bought them a life with shame." The room was quiet but for the ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying her. She hadn't flinched, hadn't tried to soften her words. There was steel in her spirit, the kind that didn't bend under gossip or temptation. He respected that more than he could say. "You've got more grit than most men I've hired to work this land," he said at last, his tone softer now. "In more honesty than half the bankers who ride through here." Clara blinked, her lips parting as if she wasn't sure how to take the words. Compliments were rare for her, he suspected. She looked down, brushing her apron as if she needed something to do with her hands. "I only do what's right," she murmured. Samuel rose from the table, his chair scraping softly against the wooden floor. He set his hat back on his head, but his eyes stayed fixed on her. "You ain't just welcome here as a cook, Clara. You and your boys got a place here as long as you need it. This ranch could use more of your kind of strength." Her eyes shimmered, though she tried to hide it by turning away. Her voice cracked slightly. "I don't know what to say, sir." "Don't say nothing yet," Samuel replied. "Just know I saw enough last night to understand the kind of woman you are. That's all I needed." Her breath caught, realization dawning across her face. He had been awake. He had seen her, heard her whispered vow, watched her polish his boots in the quiet of the night. For a moment, shame flickered there, but it quickly melted beneath the warmth of his gaze. She nodded, her voice trembling but certain. "Then I'll keep doing my best, Mr. Hartley." Samuel's expression softened into something rare, something almost tender. "Do that, Clara, and maybe one day this won't just be my ranch. Maybe it'll be home for all of us." With that, he stepped out into the bright morning, the door closing gently behind him. Clara stood frozen in the kitchen, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt more than survival tugging at her chest. She felt hope, fragile, but alive. And Samuel, striding across the sunlit yard, carried with him the quiet certainty that what he had found in Clara Benson was worth more than land, money, or cattle. It was the kind of truth a man could build a future on.